Hi, everyone. Welcome to this short 30-minute session. And I apologize for those of you who might have registered on Friday. And unfortunately, I couldn't make that and I had to change it today. So welcome anyway. I've got 30 minutes to spend with you. Tim Baker's my name. And I really want to talk about continuous improvement in teams. It's one of those things that gets left off the list. And I think the reason for that is pretty straightforward. We're all very, very busy. We're all being pushed from pillar to post to do so many things in our working environment. The last thing we find that we can do is to continuously improve the team. We're too busy working in the business rather than on the business. So what I want to do is talk about this challenging topic today and perhaps some of the tips and hints on how you can do this. If you show me any high-performing team, I'll show you a team who are committed to continuous improvement. They never arrive. They're always keen to try to make the best of what they're doing, always trying to do better, doing things faster, better, safer, easier, more cost effective. All of these things are part of what a high performing team does. So I'll share my screen with you and we'll get underway and we'll actually have a look at how that might work. So just for those that don't know who I am, just a bit of information or a bit of insight about me. You can see I'm an author. I've written 13 books. And one of those books, of course, is Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams. You'll note, of course, I also give keynote addresses and run workshops on leadership and also am an executive coach. And you can see I also play rugby in the Golden Oldies competition here in Brisbane. And I look like I'm running pretty quickly there, but if you can see the guy behind me, you can understand why. Anyway, let's get stuck into the topic today. Now, my book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams, has had a number of really nice testimonials from sporting identities and also from senior leaders. And I did go in and I did look at the All Blacks, who are one of the great sporting teams in the world, and looked at the team that gets an 83% success rate in terms of winning games. I wanted to find out what makes them tick, and I got some really interesting information that I share with you in my book. Now, one of the objections that, as I started out with, one of the objections that people have about this topic, and rightly so, is how do I find the time to work on the business rather than in the business? Because all of us are completely snowed under with work. And really the only time we actually do attend to, the only time we attend to improving things is when there's a crisis. And normally when there's a crisis, there's a cost associated with it. We have no choice then but to down tools and start to look at how we can make things work when there's a mistake or a mishap or some sort of miscalculation that leads to some sort of poor result. So obviously we should be doing this day by day, moment by moment, situation by situation. And what I want to do is share with some ways of doing that today and have a look at some of the possibilities that are open to you. So I'll talk about debriefing, because I think at the end of the day, the debrief provides you with a wonderful window or opportunity to be able to look at your own systems and processes and how you do things and make improvements where necessary. And one of the key ways of doing that is the after-action review, which is a review that's done in the military, and now the corporate world has taken over the after-action review. But unfortunately, it's become very much a box-ticking exercise, a quality assurance technique, rather than a genuine attempt for continuous improvement. We'll look at the concept of continuous improvement and what it means, and perhaps where you might want to start in terms of your own continuous improvement with your team. And I've got a very special offer for you at the end of this presentation, which I will share with you later. Now, in my book, The 8 Characteristics of a High-Performing Team, you can see that the model that I'm sharing with you now has the 8 characteristics around the outside. We've got building trust, sharing leadership, being agile, creating purpose, managing stakeholders, improving systems, utilizing diversity, and learning continuously. So what I'm going to focus on today is improving systems, because I believe that that's the area where we can gain significantly. And as I said before, all high-performing teams are engaged in continuous improvement on a regular basis, hence why they're a high-performing team. One of the great teams, sporting teams in the world, as I mentioned, is the New Zealand All Blacks. They're a rugby union team who are always in a state of continuous improvement. And I talk about them in great detail in my book. So what are your options? I guess when you think about it, when you're looking at improving things, you've probably got 4 options. And normally these options would be options where there's a debrief. So you can see that on the left-hand side, we've got formative, and then on the right-hand side, we've got summative. Formative is basically meaning during. So if we're doing a project at different times, we'll stop, we'll check how we're going, we'll make amendments, we'll make changes and what have you, and recalibrate. And we do that because we have regular meetings and get-togethers during a major project. And of course, at the end of a project, there's another golden opportunity where you can do some summative feedback, that is looking back on the project to make sense of it and how you can do things better, faster, and easier for the future. And on the right-hand side, you'll notice that there are 2 types of debriefs. There's an informal and there's a formal. Now, the informal, of course, is where people get together, perhaps even in an impromptu basis, and they look at how things are traveling. And the formal is a more formal approach where there might be reports, both verbal and written, that are completed for a project. So you've basically got 4 different options. So regular dialogue is, of course, done throughout a project and normally done fairly informally, whereas a check-in is normally something that's been designated as a time and done more formally in a team meeting. In terms of summative, you've got the end of a project debrief, which can be done informally depending on the size of the project and the number of people engaged. And you've got an end of project report where people will report on their various aspects of the project. Now, what I'm suggesting to you here is that these are golden opportunities for you to really review your systems and processes and to work out how things can be done in a more improved way. So that's basically the options that you've got. Otherwise, you've got to down tools and dedicate a specific amount of time. And it's not always in context. Whereas at least if you do it this way, it's done in a context. Now, Peter Senge, in his book, The Dance of Change, talks in glowing terms about the after-action review. And he also points out that he believes that the AAR, which is the short form for after-action review, is often, unfortunately, not used as a really useful technique, but more, as he says there, a sterile technique which is done because it has to be done rather than because it can make some improvement. Now, my suggestion to you is that if you do use an after-action review, the best 3 questions that you can ask are these questions. And I think there are so many different versions of the after-action review, it can get quite confusing. But I think if you can confine yourself to these 3 questions, you'll be doing well. And of course, you can do this during, as I said, or after. You can do it formally or informally. But ultimately, your first question would be, what systems, processes, and procedures are working well? So let's start with what's working well. There's inevitably there are things that are working well, even if the project is a disaster. There's always something that's going well. And let's start with the positives, because that creates an upward spiral of positivity, which I think is very important. Then the second question that you can ask, and I would suggest you do this with your team. The second question is, what systems, processes, and procedures are not working well? Now, even if the project is a magnificent success, the reality is there will be some systems, processes, and procedures that are not working well. And so what we do in this question is highlight what those key points are. And then ultimately, the third question, and I think this is where the rubber meets the road, is what improvements or changes can we make for the future? And by involving your team in that process, you're going to get a situation where you're going to get a variety of different opinions. People who are engaged in this process will have skin in the game. They will very much be attached to the changes that are made. And of course, it's far easier to implement that way. Now, don't think for a minute that this has to take a long time. These after-action reviews can take 10 to 15 minutes. And that 10 to 15 minutes is very, very well invested in terms of being able to improve how you do things in your team. Here are some examples of where you could use an after-action review. So you've got a new system or procedure that's been implemented in your team. So perhaps at the end of a period of time, you might sit down with your team and review whether it's working well. Another opportunity would be after a busy period where you really haven't had a time to think. This would be a time when you can look at how things have traveled, usually when capacity has been stretched. Or it could be a trial period of a new system or a procedure that's being put in place. It might be a major training activity, and we might want to debrief on some of the opportunities that have come out of that training program. We might also do this between shifts where one shift is about to leave, and before they leave, we get the new shift in. We have a stand-up meeting, and what we do is we talk about what went well during that shift, what didn't go well, and what needs to change for the next shift. That is a continuous improvement process. It means that the next shift can move in and do what they need to do, learn the lessons from the previous shift, and make sure that things are continuously improving. Now, a couple of examples of real life examples of this is that I was working with a homicide detective who basically, after they go to a person's place and of course they're doing their investigations about a murder, obviously that would be a stressful situation, and it might be sort of long hours. And she tells me that at 1 o'clock in the morning, usually when they finish their investigation, they're on the footpath, everybody's keen to go home, and she conducts an after-action review at that point. She asks the detectives in her team 3 key questions: what went well, what didn't go well, and what will we do differently in the next investigation we'll inevitably be involved in. Everyone gets straight to it, and then everyone disperses. You see, if you leave that till Monday, if it's a Friday, for example, it's likely that people are going to forget or be disengaged, or they've moved on to the next thing. So the best time to do a review is often right after an event or a situation. Another example is an IT startup firm who's looking at putting systems and processes in place. And often in those cases, there are very few systems and processes. And of course, what we've got to try and do is build capacity as we go. And certainly that would be a good opportunity to do that, an after-action review. I've seen it done very formally in government organisations where there's maybe a large example of a large project in the community that's been completed. And before everybody disperses, they get all the key stakeholders in the room and ask themselves those 3 questions: what went well, what didn't go well, and what will we do differently next time? And basically what they can do in this formal review process is build up a number of key lessons for the next time. So where else can you start? I mean, apart from a project, where do you start to build continuous improvement in your team? What mandatory team activities chew up a lot of time with little results. I think the best place to start really is if you look at your team and what they're designed to do, and obviously it's the business that you're in. If you think about some of the major activities that you're involved in, that's the place to start. The place to start is what takes up the majority of your time. Is it report writing? Is it training? Is it data input? What is it that takes up the majority of your time? That's the place to start. And there's a good reason for that. Why? Because it takes so much time. If we can get some small incremental changes in a very large activity, it's going to make a significant difference. So the question then is, what systems can be changed? So let's look at our processes and the way we do things once we've honed in on our core activities. What systems can be changed and what actually might make a difference? So those things can be important questions that you can bring your team together and ask. But don't start with the obscure things. Start with the things where you spend the majority of your time, effort, and energy. That will give you a significant opportunity to look for improvements that'll make a big difference. The other thing I would suggest is that continuous improvement is often thought to be the responsibility of the team leader. I don't think that is the case. In fact, I think it is wrong to think that. And I think what you need to do is get your team involved in that process. Why? Because there's two important reasons why. One reason, of course, is that by getting your team involved, you're getting different perspectives. So you might have someone on the team that's got a great idea, whereas somebody else may not. So we're tapping into the resources and the diversity of our team. So that's one obvious reason. Now, the other reason is that what you want is that whatever you decide in your team meeting, you can then commit to that. And you'll find that if you get your team involved in this whole process of commitment, what you'll find is that they'll be more likely to commit than they would be if it was just you suggesting that this is what we need to do. So the old adage that people don't argue with their own data is really, really important in that sense. So get your team involved. I think that's really, really important. Now, some other questions you might like to ask yourself, some key improvement questions, and this might help you. So you might start with one of these questions, or you might actually put all of these questions on the table. For example, how can this process be done quicker? So I'm asking a very specific question there. So this might be a process that just is a very cumbersome. It takes a lot of time and energy. And so what we might ask is, how can we do it quicker without compromising quality? That would be a good question. What about this question? How can this process be done more accurately? So if there is a process that you have which is riddled with mistakes and you want to rid yourself of those mistakes, then obviously it would be about accuracy. And how can you do that more accurately? So throw that on the table. Ask your team what they think. Get some feedback around that. How can this activity be done in a more timely manner? Perhaps there are deadlines. I'm sure there are other people in your organization and beyond who rely very much on the service or the product that you produce in your team. And that being the case, of course, timeliness is critical. So what we want to do is to meet deadlines and make sure that we honor those deadlines. Because if we don't do that, of course, other people in the organization suffer. So the question might be, how can we make sure that we can commit to deadlines? What do we need? Do we need to start earlier? Do we need to, reduce the amount of effort that we put into whatever it is we're producing so time doesn't become a factor? Is it that we need to remind people of the time, of the deadline, on a regular basis so that people are attuned to that being a priority, whatever it might be? How can this procedure be carried out more cost effectively? Now, all things cost. The time you put into anything is money because it's people's, labor. So the question is, how can we reduce our costs in a team? Now, this is not just relevant to the private sector. It's also relevant to the public sector. It's also relevant to not-for-profits as well. So how can we do things more cost effectively? Now, that might be a very important question, particularly when you've got budget cuts going on in your organization. And the final question you might like to ask your team is, how can this task be done with greater productivity? Now, so again, by asking these very specific questions, you're likely to get good answers and not generalizations, such as improving communication. We're starting to get different people's opinions about these things, which become critically important. So try to ask some of those questions. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised at how incredibly effective that is. So the process really is threefold. You've got to create the time and the space to examine your systems. Now, I've suggested 4 different debrief approaches that you could use, but you might also dedicate a time in your team meeting, but you must create a space of time, because otherwise, and I know it won't be done. Then you've got to initiate a conversation about how systems can be improved. And that means, asking some of the questions I've just gone through. And then what you need to do is to involve everyone who's engaged in your team, affected by that system, in that conversation, so that everybody has an opportunity to have a say. Not everyone might, but everyone's given that opportunity. And out of that comes a continuous improvement process. Now, of course, all the ideas that have been put on the table are not viable. So just because we have come up with an idea, a way of doing things faster, better, easier, more productively, no matter what it might be, the truth is we have to assess it. And I guess there are 3 criteria we need to consider when we're assessing any continuous improvement concept. First of all, how much time will it take to implement? Now, if it takes a long time and we're getting significant results, well, it might be worth the investment. But of course, if we're taking a long time to do something and it may not produce the results we want, it might not be viable. The complexity of it, how difficult is it for us to be able to make the changes that we need to? And thirdly, what is the cost factor associated with the change? And I don't mean just cost in terms of dollars and cents. It could also be time again. So usually if we use these 3 lenses and we look at ideas that come up in our meetings around these 3 things, we can get a very quick sense of whether or not that's viable or not. And if it's not viable, we just let it go. And of course, if it is viable, we make it happen. So folks, there's some concepts around continuous improvement in your team. I strongly recommend that you make an effort wherever possible to do this. And let's just, 2 more things I want to do before I finish up. Now, next Friday, you'd be aware that every Friday I had one of these sessions, and unfortunately I had to change last Friday, as I mentioned, but this Friday, that's the 17th of June at 10 a.m, that's Australian Eastern Standard Time, I have another webinar, which is short, sharp, 30 minutes on improving engagement through feedback. And we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. Also, I have a special offer for those of you that are interested, and that is, normally this would be $40 plus postage. My book, Winning Teams, the 8 Characteristics of High-Performing Teams, I'm happy to send a copy of you signed for $25. All you've got to do is send me an email and let me know that you're interested. There's my email address. Just let me know by the close of business today, and I'll make that happen for you. Okay. So thank you, everyone. I've enjoyed the opportunity of presenting to you today. I hope we see you next Friday. I hope we see you every Friday. In fact, try some of those strategies around continuous improvement. You'll be very pleasantly surprised at the impact that they can have. And you'll find that it can make a significant difference to improving how you do things in a team. And remember, all high-performing teams are basically teams that are interested continuously in continuous improvement. Thanks, everyone. All the best. Have a wonderful week, and we'll catch up on Friday. Thank you, everyone, and goodbye.